Hi, everybody. Todd here, and I hope you're having a great day. You know, it's easy to go ahead and throw an EQ on the various tracks on your mix, but can you hear what's really going on? Well, today I have 3 practice tips for you that'll help you hear EQ, plus stick around for the bonus at the end. It just might help out those of you that are still a bit unsure. Now, for the purpose of these tips, I went ahead and threw a basic mix up here in Studio One, just moved a few faders. There are no effects on any of the tracks, buses, or the mix bus. Now, we'll use the kick drum for this first tip, and I've thrown the Wave Shep 73, that's a Neve 73 style EQ, on the kick drum, and we'll go and listen to the various bands. This one has a high pass filter, a low, mid, and high band, and I recommend starting out with a fairly simple EQ like this, so there isn't too many adjustments available, anything that's going to make this more complicated. So let's listen to the kick drum and let's make some adjustments. And as you can hear, the high pass filter makes a pretty significant difference there. We'll leave that off for the rest of the demo. Now we're going to go to the low band here. And you can hear how the different bands here make a difference. So when we were at, the lowest here was 35 hertz. We really had just that really low thud at the bottom. And we got a little more punch when we moved up here to the 80 hertz. But then by the time we got to 110, we were actually getting almost the sound of the air inside the drum. So a really significant difference on each of these here. We'll go ahead now into the mid band. And by the time we start getting up into the higher and higher frequencies, it's starting to have more an effect on the bleed that's coming through as opposed to the kick drum itself. And we won't go to the high band on the kick drum. So now what I like to do is go ahead and dial in the sound that I like. Now, one of the things that's really cool about these vintage style EQs is that you have only a few bands to choose from here. And so they had to be really selective about what they gave you. And they almost are a roadmap to help you to tie into which instrument they're for. For example, on a Neve EQ, you might quite often use 80 hertz on a kick drum, but you might go with 110 for the bass guitar and 220 for the snare. And that again is by definition. It's there by design to help you have a band to use for each instrument. So when you had limited choice, this was a good way to get that done. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to dial in a sound that I think I like here. And I'm going to use actually 80 hertz on the low, and I'm going to use roughly around 3 here for the mid band. You can see that change is very subtle, but just gives a little bit of oomph to the low end on the kick drum. So now that I have this, and we started to begin hearing what EQ sounds like, the tip is to go ahead and throw another EQ on exactly the same track and see if you can dial it into match. And so what I like to do is choose one that's very similar. So you can see I've created a second track here, and it's an exact duplicate of the one we've just been working on. But here I went ahead and I've added the universal audio version of the Neve 1073. And you might say, oh, well, I'll just dial it in exactly the same. And, you know, they'll be pretty close, but not exact. The reason we start out with one that's so similar is that it's easier to make a match when we're dealing with the same types of controls, as opposed to right away going to a full parametric EQ with multiple bands that we can drag up and down. So now that we have this, we'll go ahead and I'll just actually close out the one on the first track. It's still there. And we're just going to go ahead and use the second track now with the UA version. Okay, and we'll say we're pretty close there. Now the trick is we'll now take both of these, I'll reopen the Shep 73, and you'll see that the settings are not exactly the same. I've added a little more 80 hertz on the UA version than the Waves version, and also I have a little more of a cut here on the mids on the Waves version compared to on the UA version. Now what we want to do is see how close these are, and again, for some of you, it may be helpful to have a spectrum analyzer. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Actually, we just keep this one up here as well. I'll pin that so we can see them all together. So this is going to be the spectrum analyzer for the first track. We'll go ahead and do the same thing on the second track. Pin that as well. And now we can switch. We'll see just, you know, how close these waveforms are. I'm going to set the hold to length, full length on these so we can just see where we're at as a maximum. And I'm going to the biggest peaks first. You can see here that just below, right around 80 hertz, I'm sitting at right around, where am I at here? Minus 29.2 dB. And here I'm sitting at around, minus 29, almost exactly the same, minus 28.8, pretty close. Next one I'm going to look at here is this little peak just below 5K. And here we can see it sitting around minus 48 dB. And here I'm sitting right around minus 47.6. So ear was pretty good on this. You, of course, can go through it a little more detail here. There can be fluctuations in the Q, in other words, the width of the bands in these two EQs. But again, because they're both representations of a Neve 1073, I'm thinking they're going to be fairly similar. And so that's a good thing to do. You can go through this with each instrument in the mix. It's fairly simple when you only have a few bands to play with, and see how close you can dial it in, then check back on the spectrum analyzer. Now for the second tip, we'll stay with the setting we have dialed in for the kick drum sound we like, but this time I've added up a parametric equalizer here. This is even a dynamic parametric equalizer onto the duplicated track. And this is going to be a lot more complicated because we have an infinite number of frequency ranges here, boost and as well as Q. So, we can have different widths. If we want to have, an effect on a different range of frequencies, that's going to make this a whole lot more complicated to dial in the sound. So we really, have to listen. It's, again, the next step after we've tried to do it with very similar EQs. So let's go ahead. We'll listen to the dialed in sound first, and then we'll see if we can duplicate it. And a little bit different there. Here I have just ever so little 0.2 dB of gain sitting here at a frequency of a little over 2K here. So a little bit different than how it looked here on the Neve EQ. We'll go ahead and throw these spectrum analyzers up, and we'll see what we can do here for the sound. We'll see just how close we were on the two of them. And again, I'm looking here right around 80 hertz to start, minus 30 dB. Pretty close here. Yeah, actually really close. Maybe minus 29.7 or so. Sitting here, high point. I got it pretty close, which is one thing that's interesting. The highest peak over in this range here, about minus 44.1 at 4K. And here I'm sitting right at around minus 41.5 at around 4K again. So pretty close. And again, we go through all the details and see if there's any nuances in the cue that we've missed with these two. But again, this is a fairly similar sound. I'll just let you hear both back and forth again. Okay, and so of course here again, same idea. I would go through all of the instruments, as many as you can, and go ahead and make the comparison here. Start with a fairly basic EQ to dial in the sound you like, and then try and use a fully parametric EQ to match it as close as possible. Now the third tip is to listen in the context of the individual bus. So since we're working on a kick drum here, we'll listen on the drum bus, but you can do this for any bus on your mix, and ultimately you want to work up to the entire mix bus. Once again, we'll start with similar EQs and we move up to where we would use a parametric EQ combined with maybe just a tri-band EQ. So we'll just let you hear the difference here. I'll quickly dial them in. And we could spend more time getting it exact, but we'll just go ahead and I'll add the spectrum analyzers back up now. And I've been doing this for a while now, so I'm within a dB here. But the idea is to move between different instruments, and again, not all at once, and that way you'll have a chance to work on being able to actually do the comparison. Now the bonus tip for those of you that maybe have a little hard time imagining the entire curve along the spectrum analyzer and you'd like to see things overlaid, if you have any type of A/B comparison plugin such as Plugin Doctor, I'm just going to pull it up on screen here. It's going to show you the curve of each. You can actually load both plugins in here. So all I've done is on a single track, I put in Plugin Doctor. I have the Shep 73 mono and the Universal Audio 73 mono with the EQ here. And as you can see, I have the dialed in sound sitting here on the Sheps. And then I have right now I have the UA off. And even with the UA off, you can see it's adding some character, some tone to this here. You can also see a little bit of movement. That's partially the algorithm, but it also can be intentional. Some plugins you'll see have an analog option, and that'll cause actually movement as well as a jagged line to come along here. And the idea is the same. You don't want to be looking at this when you do it, but go ahead and just play the individual instrument and try and match them. Now when you think you have them fairly close, go ahead and just drag it up and take a look. Now you see here that below 20 Hertz, there's quite a bit of divergence here, but that's below what we can hear. Up above, I'm pretty close along the profile. You can see, could you have made a slight change here, get a little closer, maybe I can get it pretty close. Not bad though overall. A little bit of additional boost on the one here, and perhaps I could actually have even dragged that up a little. No, that's not going to work here either. So within the accuracy of what I can do here, and really you got to think this is a kick drum, I'm going between, about 50 Hertz here, pretty even all the way up to a little over 6K. And so that's the idea. You can absolutely use a Plugin Doctor or another A/B comparison plugin so that you can get a visualization of the two over top of each other. Because of course the entire curve affects the sound as well. Now, I recommend you go through as many instruments as you can individually in the context of a bus or stem, as well as the full mix. But make sure you give your ears a break. After a while, it's hard to hear the difference and understand what's happening from one to the next. And if you're looking for other ways to level up your music production or mixing, check out one of the videos on the screen. As always, I really appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you next time.